Hi everyone. So, fearsome fighter Mark Ripley challenges legendary fighter Cliff Fields. Bartley Gorman goes to the John Fury fight and knocks out 6 Doormen. Bartley Gorman challenging Roy Lenny McLean. And I'm also going to talk about in this video when my mate Bobby Frankham challenged Bartley Gorman, and they were going to fight on a container ship out in the, I think in the North Sea. And Bobby Frankham trains Brad Pitt. When Brad Pitt came over to film Snatch, Brad Pitt stayed with Bobby Frankham on the Traveller site, and he came down Callahan Gym as well, where I trained, and was trained by Bobby Frankham Ricky, so I'll talk about that as well. Bartley Gorman himself said of Mark Ripley, "I fought Mark Ripley down in Kent in the late 60s. He was a few years younger than me, but utterly fearless, and by the 70s was known as a man to avoid. He and I never went at it again, but he'd given me a stern test. I did hear that Ripley wanted to fight Cliff Fields, an unlicensed boxer who at the time was the daddy of them all, what they called a Guv'nor down there. That never came off either. I don't know who would have won, but I do know that in a street fight, Ripley would have eaten most men alive." So that's coming from Bartley Gorman himself talking about Mark Ripley. That shows the level that Mark Ripley was. Interesting to see that he wanted to fight Cliffy Fields. I imagine a bare knuckle fight. So I'd never known that before. So very interesting to hear that. In my first video talking to Mark Ripley, I made the mistake of saying that the fight was a victory for Bartley, when in fact Mark Ripley and Bartley came to a draw. The fight was classed as a draw, and Mark Ripley was only a teenager, which goes to show, to fight Bartley Gorman to a draw as a teenager shows that Mark Ripley was definitely a special fighter. So Bartley Gorman and the Furies are closely related, and there's actually a picture of Bartley Gorman holding a punch bag for John Fury, and there's a little Tyson Fury watching the bag work there. Bartley Gorman went to one of John Fury's fights around 1990. This is from a newspaper article in the 90s, and the Doormen refused to let Bartley Gorman in to watch John Fury fight in Leicester, and Bartley Gorman ended up knocking out the 6 Doormen. And the words were, "Prize fight gypsy KOs 6 bouncers. The first 2 bouncers were big beefy guys over 6 foot, but he, Gorman, poleaxed them." Gorman was at a boxing match in Leicester to watch his cousin John Fury box, and the security would not admit him, so they never let him in, and he knocked him out. Another story I came across was that Bartley Gorman went over to Merthyr Tydfil to spar a decent heavyweight over there called Roger Barlow. Roger Barlow had 18 fights and was quite a good prospect apparently in Merthyr, but originally from Coventry. And there's 2 conflicting stories to this. One was in the Boxing News and one was in the newspaper, I think. And the Boxing News article read like this: "Eddie Thomas, Welsh manager, seeks heavyweight and plans to stage a tournament in South Wales in September or October. Bartley Gorman and company went to Merthyr, and Gorman sparred with Roger Barlow 2 rounds and nearly KO'd the light heavyweight contender." So that was saying that Bartley Gorman got the better of Roger Barlow. But there's another conflicting article which said that Barlow landed the best punch that Bartley had ever taken. Now we have an article from December 1975 Daily Mirror. "Gorman challenges Roy Pretty Boy Shaw, who recently knocked out Donny the Bull Adams for the bare knuckle championship of England. But the match was to be for £20,000 each with 6-ounce gloves. Later on, Gorman would challenge Lenny McLean for 100 grand, but that never came to fruition. Roy Shaw went on to fight Mad Dog Mullins instead of Gorman." So we get to my mate Bobby Frankham. Now a lot of you may know Bobby Frankham. He was a professional boxer, got his licence taken away for hitting the referee when the referee intervened in one of his fights, and he got banned from boxing. And after he got banned from boxing, I think Bartley Gorman challenged Bobby to a bare knuckle fight. The fight was going to be on a cargo ship in the North Sea, and it was apparently for £1 million. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's a lot of money for a bare knuckle fight. And years later, Bobby said that the reason he never did the fight is because he was advised not to by his dad. And me and Bobby knew each other well. I sparred with Bobby, and Bobby we had a couple of rounds in the gym one day, which is quite funny. And Bobby actually drove me and Ricky English, my trainer, up to my ABA quarters and semis up in Liverpool. So we drove up in the car. Bobby was there with me and Ricky English, and I actually had Les Stevens as my corner man as well. Yeah, so Les Stevens is another very well-known fighter and travelling man. So I had a good team up there with me, and I won both my fights in the ABA quarters and semis. But Brad Pitt also came down to stay with Bobby on the Traveller site when they filmed Snatch. Brad Pitt stayed with Bobby and all the people on the site, picking up the mannerisms, learning how to throw the punches and the styles of fighting and all different things of Traveller life. And to me, that's one of Brad Pitt's best movie roles, I think. Definitely one of his most entertaining films. But yeah, Bobby and Ricky English were both around all that. And back then, along with Bobby Frankham, I used to spar with quite a few of the Travellers. I used to spar Big Paul Joyce. After we fought, me and Paul sparred each other, and we would spar with Matt Skelton, we would spar with Michael Sprott, Roman Greenberg. We'd travel all over and do our sparring. And Paul never had a gum shield, never had a head guard. He would just spar with none of that equipment on. And Paul was in fact going to fight. I think Paul was going to fight for the Guv'nor fight title at one point, and I think the bloke who he was going to fight didn't want it. So yeah, Paul would be a handful for anyone in that game because of his size, speed, heart, boxing ability. He's deceptively quick for that size. But I sparred with a lot of the McDonoughs. I sparred with a lot of Travellers before their bare knuckle fights, the McDonoughs and the Nevins, and I fought Paddy Nevin as well, rest in peace. And so going back to all these matchups between sort of Bartley Gorman, Mark Ripley, challenging Cliff Fields, Lenny and Roy, interested to know your opinions. I know it's difficult to say because there's no footage of Bartley or Mark Ripley fighting. We've got footage of Roy and Lenny and Cliff. But it's tricky. Bartley was 6'1", 15.5 stone. Mark Ripley was actually smaller in height, but very fearsome. Bartley said one of the hardest, if not the hardest man he ever fought. I think he rated Henry Francis as well. And I think Henry Francis might be doing a podcast soon, I was told. Not sure whether that's true or not, but that'd be interesting if Henry Francis was feared, known for his use of the headbutt. I do find it interesting to imagine Lenny McLean fighting against people like Bartley Gorman, Mark Ripley, and those in the bare knuckle, because I remember watching Lenny McLean commentating on the Dan Rooney, Amy McGinley fight, and Lenny wasn't impressed. You know, in typical Lenny fashion, he made a few jokes. I think he said something like he'd knocked the pair of them out one after another, but he wasn't impressed. He said if it was him, he would have got stuck in. But it's interesting to see what your opinions are on that, because you can actually see Dan Rooney and Amy McGinley fighting. Yeah, so please let me know in the comments any more fighters you'd like me to do anything about, in more in-depth profiles, and let me know. And please hit the like, please leave a comment, please share, and thank you to all the subscribers as well. And I'll catch up with you soon. All the best.